We're going to read, getting ready to read chapter 7. Before we do, though, I told you yesterday, if you listened, that I was going to show you a little video clip presentation about the draft and what it was. It's also called conscription. And you guys, if you remember, it's been so long since we were in school when we were talking about Greek and Latin root words. The root word script means to write. Con means with. So conscription and the suffix shun means the act of. So the act of writing with. So what conscription is when you're asked to sign your name to join with the armed forces. So our new modern name for that is the draft. So when you talk about conscription, that's the old-fashioned terminology for the draft. Okay, and we're going to watch a little clip because I was talking to you yesterday that we still have in the modern day something called selective service. And I told you that young men are asked to sign up at the age of 18 for selective service. And all it is you just register. You go online and you register for the draft, basically. And the draft has not been enacted since the mid 60s. Very unlikely that would ever be reenacted again. But we do have it because it replaces the militia that we used to have back in the day. If there was some kind of vast emergency, it's just a quick call. It would be like if we were all in a big FaceTime group and they could just real quickly push one button and call you and have us all come, have all the guys come to a meeting, and if they needed you to protect our country or for some big mass emergency. But I wanted you to watch a little video that kind of explains the draft and how it worked with the Vietnam War.
A need for more manpower upon America's deeper involvement in the Vietnam War in 1965 made President Johnson bring in conscription. Now young men, who were not considering military service, would consider whether they might get picked to fight in the Vietnam conflict across the globe. While 2/3 of Americans volunteered during the Vietnam War, the other third would be drafted. All males aged 18 to 26 were required to register for the draft. The names of American men of draft age were recorded by the Selective Service system. When called out by the local draft board, which was often composed of veterans, he would be evaluated on whether he would be drafted in the military or not. The local board's decisions were often seen as unfair. Most of the men chosen were from poor and working class backgrounds, people of color, and people from rural towns and farming communities. Draft boards would frequently defer middle-class men, who they would see as having valuable futures, and the upper classes were barely drafted at all. There were many ways in which draftees could be deferred or exempt from the draft. For example, men who were medically unfit, men who were married with children, or students at college. Men who had held college deferments were eligible for induction until age 35, but as few men between the ages of 26 and 35 were ever drafted. They could maintain a college deferment until their 26th birthday and avoid service altogether. Some draft resistors could be put in jail for refusing to fight in the war. They broke the law by escaping the draft, by refusing to turn up to the local board or fleeing to Canada. Those who were opposed to the draft became known as draft dodgers. When the war started, they were seen as cowards, but as the war dragged on and opposition to the draft grew, public attitude was more sympathetic. The draft process changed in late 1969 to make it fairer as a result of the public discontent. A draft lottery was created where 366 blue plastic capsules, each containing a birth date in the year, were dumped into a large glass container. The capsules were then drawn out, opened, and announced one by one, nervously watched on national television by young men born from 1944 to 1950. The first date announced was September 14th. So all registrants with that birthday were assigned lottery number 1. Men with lower numbers were called first and had to report to induction centers where they could be sent to the Vietnam War. The fourth and final lottery drawing was held on February 2nd, 1972, and those announced who would have been called to induction in 1973. However, President Nixon shifted to an all-volunteer force, ending the draft in the Vietnam War.
Subscribe for more Vietnam War history videos.
Okay, so as you can see, that was pretty interesting um, to find out about the draft. I think that this video is a little bit, um, I don't know, it leans a little bit and sort of seems a little bit prejudicial. If you ask me, it's a little bit propaganda-ish, because I know that they had valid reasons for why they didn't select certain people to be in the draft. So, I mean, I don't like how they made it look like they just threw away um, certain people like they didn't matter, because that's not true. Because I know several people who were drafted to go to the war, and I know a lot of you have grandparents that did, and who I wouldn't consider them non-valuable citizens who were middle class farm boys. My cousin, my one of my friends in high school, his father was drafted, and they were contributing middle class citizens, and they weren't just some kind of throwaway, unimportant trash that didn't have futures. And that video kind of made it seem that way, and I didn't appreciate that very much. But anyway, um, we're going to read chapter 7. If you remember in chapter 6, geez, I don't know how I got that far. Um, they talked about the training that they were doing in Fort Benning and how Crocker was really, really good at it. The last thing that we read at the end of chapter 6 was Rick was pretty down in the dumps because Crocker was doing really, really well. And Rick was kind of in a unspoken competition with his two buddies, 2020 and Cody, and their dogs to be the best team there at Fort Benning in the training. And he and Cracker were doing really, really well. And there, at one point, he said Crocker could even sniff out people who were underwater. And one of the things that the Viet Cong did is they would hide underwater, and they would have a piece of bamboo, which is a hollow tube, and it would kind of work like those masks, those scuba diving, or those little masks like that. You know, when you're a kid and you play with them in the pool, and you put the tube in your mouth, and you can kind of look in the mask and float on top of the water, and it lets you breathe, kind of thing. And they would hide out under the water with a piece of bamboo in amongst the other foliage, and they would hide under the water and jump up and attack you. But Cracker could smell them out. And he was, at one point, Cracker heard, sniffed out one of those tripwire booby traps. And Rick forgot and stepped around Crocker after was sitting and tripped the wire and caused it to go off. And the Sarge told him, said, you know, in Vietnam, what they call that. And he said it was a BK. And he said he didn't know what that meant, the slang term meant. And he said below the knee amputation. BK stood for below the knee. So Rick was very disheartened because he felt like he'd let Cracker down and let himself down, and he would have let a lot of guys down because they would be counting on that dog, the point man, to find all the traps to protect an entire regiment of men if they were going in, you know, to battle or whatever. So anyway, we're going on to chapter 7. Let's find out what happens here and see if Rick's mood improves any. The rest of the day dragged. One by one, the other teams took their turns at point. Only Cody and Bruno performed perfectly. Rick had hoped to get another turn, but the squad barely had any time to get through everybody, and he was exhausted anyway. After 8 hours of humping the fields and men getting settled in a grassy area as far away as possible from the swamps, Steel Cracker could smell the swampland everywhere. At first, she liked the smell of decaying leaves, but now her nose felt full of it. She could hear mosquitoes buzzing everywhere. Every so often, one of the men would clap at the air and cry out in triumph. Get used to mosquitoes, said the Sarge. You're going to meet a lot of them in your future. Rick took out the Army issue insect repellent that the men kept under the strap around their helmets. What are you doing, soldier? Said the Sarge. Now what? The Sarge said, we're in enemy territory. No bug juice. But Sarge, said Rick. He felt that righteous indignation rise up in himself. And righteous indignation means he feels like he should rightfully talk back. He should rightfully speak back against the Sarge. Charlie can smell it. Charlie can smell almost as good as your dog. Charlie is quieter than a cat. Charlie is more audacious than a monkey. That means he's nerve. He's got a lot of nerve. He's not afraid. Charlie will smell that bug juice in half a second if you use it. Rick wondered vaguely what audacious meant. Charlie was what soldiers in country called the Viet Cong. It was short for Victor Charles. In the Army, every letter of the alphabet had a word assigned to it, as radio operators could make sure no mistakes were made while they talked to one another. A was always Alpha, B was always Bravo, C was Charles or Charlie, and so on. Then what's the point of giving it to us? Rick asked. Are you mouthing off, soldier? Rick could see that U-Haul was about to explode. No, Sergeant, I'm trying to learn, Rick said. I appreciate your superior knowledge on all that matters, Sergeant. Tact and diplomacy. That was the right attitude, mister. Malaria is a problem over there. For the information of you know-nothings, malaria is carried by mosquitoes. You can use bug juice around camp, but not out in the forward areas. Rick wanted to ask, why wear us down before we even get to Vietnam? He considered sneaking bug juice on his face, but if he got caught, he might even get written up. He squished a mosquito on his arm, saw the blood gush out of it. He tried not to think about it. Instead, he stuck his fingers into Cracker's coat and felt for ticks. Then he ran his fingers backward through her hair and then forward. Then he brushed her hair. Cracker had already shed her inner coat. German Shepherds had 2 coats, but the inner one, which was mostly down, shed every summer or in hot weather. Cracker's eyes shone as Rick brushed her. She relaxed as his fingers moved back and forth. Good, Rick. Good boy. When Rick tried to stop brushing her, she pawed at him for more. She liked his sweaty smell. She liked the way he brushed her. She liked the food he gave her, and she liked being outside. She pushed up close to him. She liked being outside near his smell with him brushing her. Tristy walked over to sniff her. They touched noses, and then Tristy returned to 2020. As he brushed Cracker, Rick calculated several of the handlers had made multiple mistakes today. He had made only one. Not that he cared about a trophy or anything. He figured the time would come when even Bruno and Cody would make a mistake, while Rick and Cracker would not. He lit a cigarette from what he was already smoking. For some reason, he always savored the first drag of a cigarette the most. Theoretically, if you couldn't use bug juice, you couldn't smoke a cigarette. But since U-Haul chain smoked, a combination of cigars and cigarettes, the rule went down the drain. The men began opening their C rations. Rick blew smoke into the air as he listened to some guys talk about the Atlanta Braves and the Falcons. He saw Cody eyeing everybody's C-rats, probably thinking up deals to strike. Rick had pulled ham and chokers, which everybody except Cody agreed was the worst C-rat available. The chokers were lima beans, that is, the nastiest vegetable Mother Nature ever invented. Cody said, trade you for my meatballs? Rick jumped at it. Deal. Spaghetti and meatballs was considered one of the primest of the prime C rations. Even with just the meatballs, Rick felt like he'd struck gold. Rick took out the empty can that they all carried as a stove to heat their meals. You placed the trioxin heat tabs inside and poked holes in the bottom to keep fumes from building up inside the can. The Army issued these heat tabs, but supposedly soldiers in country used C4 explosive to heat their food. C4 exploded only with heat and impact. A match caused the C4 to heat up like the devil himself was cooking your food. Rick and some guys had tried it once during advanced infantry training. It was like putty, and you shaped it into a ball the size of a quarter, with a little point on the top. You cooked your C-rats in 30 seconds flat, heated your coffee instantaneously. Sarge was enjoying a cigar, alternately puffing on it and smiling at it. Cody leaned forward toward Rick. You all almost wigged big time when you questioned him about the bug juice. You better lie low. Yeah, Rick said softly. Thanks. Rick took out the P38 can opener he'd attached to his dog tag chain to open the C rations. Cody was saying to someone, I'll trade you 4 ciggies for your fruit salad. Cody was the only man in the squad who didn't smoke. Rick opened Cracker's food first. He dumped it into his steel pot the way Sarge had told them to do. She gobbled the food, and then he poured the water in from one of her canteens. Cracker waited for more food. Rick said, no, girl. We travel light in the field, 1 meal a day. She whimpered but lapped up the water before laying her head down. Her eyes turned sadly toward Rick. Aw, for crying out loud. Hey, Sarge, Rick wheeled. Cracker's twice as big as some of the dogs. Shouldn't she get more food? 1 can per dog in the field, Sarge said. How many times do I have to tell you guys? Rick and 2020 met eyes, and 2020 slipped a bit of Tristy's food to Cracker. Cracker swallowed it and felt it slide unchewed down her throat. She laid her paw over Rick's ankle as he ate his own dinner. But just because she liked her paw there, not to ask him for anything. She never begged him while he was eating. He hated that more than anything. Willie had always handed her treats while he ate. Willie had always done whatever she wanted. A brief anxiety washed over her at the thought of Willie. But life was good here, too. The sun sank over the forest as the men ate and smoked. One of the guys, who apparently thought he was going to kiss butt to a promotion, squatted down near U-Haul. "We're lucky to have your wisdom and experience, Sergeant. So, what's it like in Nam?" the guy asked. Sarge belched, cleared his throat before speaking. "Wetter than anything you've ever experienced," he said, "or so dry your tongue feels like paper, depending on the season. And hot, no matter what the season. When it rains for weeks. We had one guy drown on a hilltop that flooded during monsoon season. None of the birds could get to him because of the weather. Birds were helicopters. They found his body later on top of the dry hill. The doc said he'd drowned." Rick contemplated that. Personally, he would have abandoned his gear and swam to safety. "Why didn't he swim?" someone asked. "To where?" the Sarge asked simply. "The whole countryside was flooded, and the guy was star of his swim team in high school." Rick contemplated that. "Does the enemy use dogs?" another soldier asked. "Nah. But they put a bounty on both our dogs and handlers. The rumor is they pay anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 US to anyone who brings them a dog's tattooed ear." Rick wondered whether that was true. 1,000 or 20, it was a lot of money for a dog's ear. Rick lay on his back in the grass. Cracker stretched on her back and kicked her legs in the air. The shadows had grown long. The forest was peaceful. 2020 was rolling his eyes around. One thing Rick had learned was that every man had a quirk, just as every dog did. 2020 did weird eye exercises. Cody was always grinning. Jonesy walked in his sleep. Petrocelli said, every other word. Rick didn't know what his own quirk was. His righteous indignation? That wasn't a quirk. Maybe generalists didn't have quirks. "For all intensive purposes, I'm getting sleepy," 2020 said. 2020 continued moving his eyes around and up and down, which he did every night. He claimed it was some kind of ancient Chinese method of keeping your eyes strong, but he looked like a nutcase. Rick called out, "Hey man, you look like a nutcase." 2020 looked at him seriously. "For all intensive purposes, this is the best way to keep your eyes strong." That was too much for Cody, who started laughing. "That doesn't make any sense," he said. 2020 just wrinkled his brow. Rick chuckled, but 2020 just lay back, took off his glasses, and laid his palms over his eyes to meditate or something. Tristy lay with her head on his stomach. Rick saw several of the dogs like that, and before long, Cracker came over and set her head on his own belly. Rick lit the last of 4 cigarettes that had come with his sea rations. The moon was full. Under the moonlight, Cody was winding his watch. It was a special gold watch his grandfather had given him. Rick didn't own anything of value, but if he had, he certainly wouldn't have brought it here. But Cody had been close to his grandfather and loved his watch. Rick tried to imagine a man drowning on a hilltop alone underneath the same peaceful moon now lighting up the sky. He could picture the whole scenario, but only as a movie. He couldn't imagine it really happening. "Hey, Sarge," he said, "that really a true story about the guy drowning on a hilltop?" You all just laughed at him. "You got a lot to learn about whipping the world, Lansky. A whole lot."